Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and welcome to video number 3 in this tutorial series, or in this intro to TypeScript and JavaScript in 2022. In this video, what I want to do is talk about expressions. Okay, so we can see here, I'll make a whole new file for this one. So we'll just create expressions.ts. We're not going to need JavaScript for this one. Okay. I think this one will probably make more sense if we just use TypeScript. Okay, but again, same idea as far as all TypeScript is doing is allowing us to add types. So essentially the only thing that's going to be different between me writing this in TypeScript and me writing this in JavaScript is just the typing. Okay, now essentially what an expression is is just a bit of code that returns a value. And as we learned, there's so far 3 sort of types of values that we've seen so far: strings, numbers, and booleans. So in that case, there's going to be expressions that when they're evaluated will result in a string, a number, or a boolean. So there are Boolean expressions, string expressions, and then number ones would be referred to as math expressions. Okay, and we can use different operators, which are different symbols we can use to interact with our different pieces of data to create an expression. And what makes an expression special is that we can take the result of an expression and assign it to a variable. Okay, so for example, let's declare a variable that should be a number. So let's say let num be number. Okay, and then that's it. Let num be number. Why is it complaining about num? There should be no num. Okay. Let's see here. I think it's actually complaining because I have it in another file. So let's see here. If I got rid of it over here, would it stop complaining? Yep. Okay, so essentially just what's happening there, it's treating them both as part of the same project because they're in the same folder. So it's like, hey, you got num over here and you got num over there. So I'm just going to comment that out so error lens can not be annoying. Okay. Okay, so let num, which is going to be a number. And again, the cool thing about let is I don't have to actually give the variable a value right away. So since I didn't actually assign it a value right now, it's just going to be called undefined. Undefined is just a value in JavaScript that represents the lack of a value. Okay, so it represents the lack of a value. So while I could just take num and make it equal a number, so I can say, hey, assign it a value, we start getting into more interesting area when we try to assign it the result of an expression. Okay, so I could assign it the result of 5 plus 5. That's an expression. Okay, like 5 plus 5 isn't a value in itself, but when you evaluate the expression, it turns into 10. Okay, 5 plus 5 equals 10. Okay, so that's an expression. Expression is just going to be, it's not just a single value, it's a sequence of sort of code that when you evaluate it turns into a number, and then I can take the result of that expression and say, hey, this variable equals the result of this expression. That's different than a statement. Statement is a bunch of code that does not turn into a value. It's just essentially a to-do list saying do this, do that, do this. Okay, but at the end I don't have anything. I can just say, hey, put it in this variable. So there's statements and expressions. Statements we'll talk about later on. Okay, so 5 plus 5. But again, num is supposed to receive a number. So what happens in JavaScript, JavaScript is weakly, by default, weakly typed. What that means is that while certain variables have different types, like there's numbers, booleans, and strings, if we try to do operations on mixed types, so if I try to say, hey, 5 plus the string of 5, instead of JavaScript by default will not throw me an error. Okay, it's just going to be like, okay, well, I'll figure out what 5 plus 5 plus the string of 5 should be. And it's going to practice what's referred to as type coercion, meaning it's going to try to make a guess. So it's going to be like, okay, well, I don't know what the string of 5 is worth. But so then what I'm going to assume is that you really want me to turn the number 5 to a string, and I'll add 2 strings together. So I'll end up getting 55. But it'll be the string of 55, which is not a number, which is why I'm getting the error. So again, TypeScript for the win. TypeScript's going to pick up on, hey, this expression doesn't result in a number. This is not a math expression. this is actually going to end up being a string expression. Okay, so the minute you start doing math, the minute you add a string in there, it's going to turn the whole thing into a string. Keep that in mind, because sometimes that can be useful, a useful trick to convert things into strings by just saying, hey, let me take this number and add an empty space to it. Okay, hey, like now the whole thing's a string. Okay, so JavaScript has some weird behaviors that don't exist in other languages. In other languages, they would just be like, you have to be clear. Like, hey, you give me a number and a string, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not going to assume, so go fix it. JavaScript is going to oftentimes try to say, hey, no, I'll figure it out. Don't worry, I got you. Okay, and sometimes it figures it out well, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's, again, where Typescript comes in. It allows us to kind of make it a little bit more rigid, so that we, these assumptions that JavaScript makes don't cause random issues. Okay, so again, in this case, since I'm adding a number and a string, JavaScript by default would just make it the string of 55. It would just take the first 5, turn it to a string, and add them together and make 5, 5, which doesn't make sense. That's not what we want. We want the number 10, because our real intention was to get the number, because we told Typescript that we want num to be a number. Okay, so 5 plus 5 is an expression that'll evaluate to a number. Okay, and you have all your typical, operators. So if I wanted to, let's say I take 5 plus 5, and then I want to subtract 5. Okay, so I'll subtract 5, so minus 5. And then I want to multiply it by 5. Okay, and then I want to divide it by 5. Okay, I have all those operators available to me in TypeScript and JavaScript. Okay, now also keep in mind that Pemdas, so if you probably remember from grade school, Pemdas, meaning the order of operations, still applies here. So that means parentheses would go first, then exponents, then multiplication and division, then addition and subtraction. Okay, so in this case, what's going to happen is that even though we start here, we have multiplication and division over here, so the 5 times 5 would happen first. So that's going to end up being 25. So then the division would happen next, so that's going to be 25 divided by 5, which ends up being 5. So now it becomes 5 plus 5 over here, which is 10. So then it becomes 10 minus this 5 over here, because again, this whole thing resulted in 5. And then this resulted in 10. So 10 minus 5 equals 5. So the result of this mathematical expression is 5. Okay? But what if I wanted to do something different? Okay, so let's actually console.log that so we can prove that I am correct. Okay. And we'll say Deno run hello world ts. Okay. Cannot find name num. Oh, because I'm doing the wrong file. Expressions.ts. There we go. And see, it results in 5. Now let's take that same expression and do it again. Except now we're going to add parentheses and we say, hey, I want this to be evaluated first. Okay. So again, the parentheses comes first, p. So what's going to happen here now, it's going to be 5 plus 5, which is 10. And then 10 minus 5 is 5. Okay, and then this will be 5 times 5, which is 25, divided by 5, which is 5. Okay, so that ends up in the same place. So let me just put the parentheses somewhere a little bit different. Let's say we'll do that. 5 plus 5, which should equal 10. Okay, and then it will evaluate the 5 times 5 here. So that'd be 25, divided by 5, 5. And then it still ends up being 10 minus 5. Okay, so I just set this up in the perfect way that no matter how I do this, it's going to end up in the same place. Let's see here. Maybe if I do the... Actually, here we go. Here's a situation where we'll get a different result. Okay. Okay, 5 minus 5 would be 0. So if this becomes 0, then it would do 0 times 5, which is going to be 0. And then 0 divided by 5 is going to be 0. So then 5 plus 5 plus 0 equals 5. We end up with 5 again. Okay, so we ended up with an expression that pretty much, however I do it, I'm going to end up with the same thing. Let me try one more. Let's just see. Okay. Let's see here. So this would do this first. So it would do 5 times 5 first, because it's in the parentheses. But in the parentheses, we then go back to our normal order of operations. So 5 times 5 is 25. So then we do 5 minus 25, and now we're at negative 20. So now this is negative 20. And then negative 5, and then it goes negative 20 divided by 5, which would be -4, I think. Yeah. What do you think about that? Let's see here. -20 divided by by 5 would be -4. Yeah. Okay. And then we would take 5 plus -4, so we get 1. So that actually will result in a different result. Okay, we found one. So that should result in 1. Okay, so the result should be 1. So let's just double check that I am correct, because that one's a little bit harder to think through. We run the file, Deno run expressions.ts. Okay, yep. So see, so basically the parentheses change the order that the math happens. So even though it's the same numbers with the same operators in order, again, that parentheses can change. So just to get, again, the math. A couple other math operators to be aware of, okay, is like num equals, there's also exponents, so you can do like 5 to the 5th power. So that would be like 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. So if we console.log num, just so you can see what that turns into. Okay, and so we get 3125. So if you took 5 to the 5th power, that's what that would be. You'll also have modulo. This is one that always confuses people. So this would be like taking the number 10 and saying modulo 2. This is referred to as the remainder operator. This is again referred to as modulo or modulus. You'll hear different people call it different things. But what it is, it's essentially like the remainder. The way I always think about it is I have 10 friends, or I have 10 slices of pizza. Okay, so imagine you have 10 slices of pizza, and I want to make sure I give it to my 2 friends, but I want to give everybody the exact same number of pieces of pizza. So if I were to divide my 10 pieces of pizza among 2 friends, each of my friends would get 5 slices of pizza. How much do I have left? Well, I'd have no pizza left, so I would get 0. Okay, and the reason why 0 is important is because that tells us that 10 is divisible by 2. Okay, and usually where you're going to use that is, generally you might have to figure out like, hey, is a number divisible by 2? Because, hey, a number that's divisible by 2 is even. And you might be trying to figure out, hey, is a number even or odd? Okay. Or you might want to figure out, hey, is this number divisible by 3? Is this number divisible by 5? I would just do, hey, the number modulo the number, and then if it equals 0, then it is divisible by that number. If it's anything other than 0, it is not divisible because there's a remainder. Okay, that's generally 99% of the time how you're going to use it. There are times where you may want the remainder. Maybe, you want to say, hey, I want to figure out what to do with what's left. Okay, so like, I got, I have 10 gallons of beer. I've served it to my 100 customers, or I served it to my 8 customers. How much is left? So that way you can figure out, okay, how can I do this? But that's what it is. It just gets you what's left. But usually the reason you care is because if there's something left, then that number is not divisible by that number. Okay, and we'll come back to that again when we start doing Boolean expressions, because it's very often used for those. Okay, but you'll see here I should just get back the number 0 when I console log the result of the modulus. Num. But the way I always do it is that whenever I want to use modulus, just to kind of work through in my head, I always just say this is the amount of pieces of pizza that I have. This is the number of friends that I have. If I split the pizza among those friends, how much do I have left? And that's how you can kind of think through the result of modulus. Cool. Okay, and that's kind of like the math expressions. Okay, so basically, again, I can then mix and match these, and I can use variables in these expressions. So if I had another number, so instead of saying like, let's say let 5, or actually we'll just say const 5 equals 5, instead of writing 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, I could write 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. So I could use variables that I've previously declared in my expressions, and they would be treated as whatever they are. If they're a number, they're treated like a number. If they're a string, they're treated like a string. If they're and notice I didn't type this, okay? Generally, Typescript's not going to like that depending on how you set up the Typescript compiler. If you're using Typescript, get in the habit of typing. So I want to make sure this is a number. Okay, it's a good habit. Cool. And that's all well and good. Okay. And then, I can use variables in my expressions like so. So that way, in case, hey, maybe there's a number you just don't know because you might be getting it from like user input or from some other calculation. So you don't know what the number is yet, so you can't hard code the number in the expression. You could have a variable that does the first expression and then use that number in the next expression. Again, this can get, fun. Okay, so now for like string expressions. Okay, so that was math expressions. Okay. And now let's get into string expressions. I might have to do a separate video on Boolean expressions because I don't want either of these videos to really go beyond half an hour. Okay, so string expressions. So string expressions, again, are going to be ones that result in a string. So let's create a variable called, let's say, let my string, which should be a string. Okay. And we'll say my string equals, I could just assign a string, but you could also do something called concatenation. Concatenation, where you can add strings together. Okay, so if I do the word 5 plus the word cheese, okay, what's going to do is just going to take those two strings, add them into one big string. That's the result of the expression, and then saves it to the expression. Generally, if you add a string to anything, it's going to turn the thing to a string. Okay, so the minute a string enters an expression, you're going to end up with a string. But let's console.log that. My string. And what I'm going to do is just so we can see sort of like what I'm going to do just to make our output a little bit cleaner, I'm going to just do a console.log here. And again, that's another good strategy, that when you're doing console logs, to sometimes have just decorative console logs that make it easier to read your terminal. So I want to just do like here math. Actually, let's not do that. Let's do it this way. Math expressions. Just so that way it's like a nice little divider when we read our output. And then I'll put another one over here right before our string stuff that says string expressions. So now when I run the code, see I get these nice little like headings, so I can kind of see the differences between the bits. Makes it easier, more organized for me to read the output. But you can see it just added the two strings together. Okay, that was not too crazy. That's called concatenation. So whenever I use the plus operator to add strings together, that is called concatenation. There's another thing you can do with strings called interpolation. Okay, and in this case, what I would do is I do my string, and I kind of get the same result. What you do is you instead of using double quotes or single quotes, you're going to use backtick. So notice that this is not a single quote. That's a backtick. You can tell because it kind of leans to the back. The backtick key is the key above your tab key. It should be the same key as the tilde, which is like the squiggly line. Okay, so like that's a tilde, this little squiggly line. But next to it is also a backtick. So it's kind of like a quotation that leans back a little bit. Okay, and the reason why that's special is that when you define a string using a backtick, it's going to give you some extra powers. I only care about one at the moment. So in this string, what I can do is if I do $ curly brackets, I could put any valid JavaScript expression in those curly brackets, and it will inject the result of that expression there in the string. So really, I'm just going to put in the word 5, because that's, I mean, this is kind of a silly example, but, and then put the word here, cheese. Actually, to make this kind of make even more sense, let's just create a couple of variables. We'll say, 1 or first string, again, it's a string variable, equals 5 as a string, and then let second, which is also a string, equal cheese. And what I can do is I can inject the variable there just by saying first, then I put a space, then I do another one of these and I say cheese. And what it's going to do is going to take the result of that variable, and not cheese, second, takes the value of these variables and it's going to inject them in that spot in the string. Okay, so it's essentially the same result. Actually, I'll take away the space so that way it's the exact same result. The same result as concatenation, but just a different way of getting there. So one way I'm taking two strings and adding them together. The other one is I'm taking this sort of blank string and then I'm just saying, here, inject this in these spots in the string. I'm injecting versus smushing together. It's the same, you get the same result. Some people like one way for certain situations better than others. It just depends. But it's the cool thing is I can also do like math expressions here, Boolean expressions. I can run functions, do all sorts of stuff, long as the result is like a singular value. So it has to be a valid JavaScript expression. And again, an expression is something that returns a one thing. So that way it has one thing to inject there in the string. Okay, but yeah, let's console log that. Console.log my string. And see, we get the same result either way, whether we use interpolation with backticks. Okay, and now let's do some experimenting. Okay, let's console.log the result of using other math operators with strings. See if we can use them. So if I did 5 minus 5, does that actually have some sort of string? Okay, so it says no. Okay, so I see it doesn't like us using that for operating on strings. So Typscript, that's again, nice thing about Typescript. Typescript can already tell us like, hey, that's not going to do what you think it's going to do. Okay, if I try to multiply. Okay, now what I think I can do here is like, I think I can do this like, if I change that to a number, no, oops, so you can't. I don't think you can use any of the other operators on strings. Okay, but that's essentially what you can do there as far as like string expressions. Okay, we have a few minutes. I think we have enough time for Boolean expressions. So let's do this. Let me go copy this over here. And a nice little trick you can do with VS Code is that if you put my cursor, so if I put a cursor right here, so see my cursor right there, a little flashing line. If I hold the Alt key, it might be different on a Mac. If I hold the Alt key and then click over here next to string over here, see now I have two cursors. And I can just kind of go back and just say Boolean expressions. Make it really easy to edit. So really taking the time, like going to look up the Visual Studio Code keyboard shortcuts can really improve your quality of life in coding in VS Code. Okay, and again, almost everything in VS Code is very customizable. So like going here to settings and exploring the cool things you can do, like changing the color theme and file icons and all this stuff, you can really kind of customize your experience and your workflow. Boolean expressions. So again, Boolean expressions are going to be things that that result in a Boolean. Okay. So here's where we get into some really interesting stuff. Okay, so let's create a variable. Let my Boolean, we'll just say my Boolean 1. So that way just give me that, because there's a my Boolean in another file. Let my Boolean, and we're not going to give it any value. And here what we can do is we can say my Boolean 1 equals, okay, and then we can use what are called Boolean expressions. Okay, and a Boolean expression is, I could use numbers, strings, whatever, but I'm not asking to do a mathematical operation. I'm asking if something is true or false. So I can ask something like, is 5 greater than 6? So since I'm using this operator, it's a Boolean operator. Okay, greater than, again, the mouth is, when you think of it like the thing, like it's always going to eat the number it thinks it's bigger. So that means I know that's saying 5 is greater than 6 because the mouth is eating the 5. Okay, if the mouth was eating the 6, then it would be like 5 less than 6 because it thinks the number on the right is the bigger number. Okay, so I just take a look at the mouth as like the thing I'm asking, is that the bigger number? Okay, if you're not too familiar with like Boolean operators. Okay, so I'm saying 5 is greater than 6. Okay, that's going to give me back true or false. Okay, console.log my Boolean 1. Okay, and we can do several of these. So I can say, is 5 greater than 6? Is 5 less than 6? Is 5 less than or equal to 6? Is 5 greater than or less than or equal than 6? Okay. Are they the same thing? So I can say, are they equal? That's going to be triple equals or double equals. We'll have a chat about that. Okay, it's complaining just because it's always going to return the same thing. There's no, but yeah, that's fine. We'll ignore that error. Okay, now if I run the here, okay, it still doesn't like it. Okay, so again, why it's complaining is just technically this will always be false. So it's like, why are you doing that? Like, why don't you just write false? Okay, so yeah, but the idea is that like if I change this to 5, and I think it's probably gonna still give me the same issue. Okay, 5. So 5 equal to 5. What this does, it means equal. So this is not saying, hey, this variable equals this. It's saying, are these two things the same? Is 5 and 5 the same thing? Generally, you're always going to want to use the triple equals. It only really exists in JavaScript. A little history behind this is that when JavaScript was first created, it had the double equal sign that like every other language has. But the double equal sign works a little bit differently. Okay, like if I were to do this, 2 equal signs equals 5, this will actually technically return true. I don't know, that error is I should probably just shut off error lens. But technically 5 in with what's called loose equality or less strict equality or equality, these are going to be the same. That's no one, like in any other language, that would not be the case. So they eventually introduced the triple equal sign so that way it can work like, you know, the way equality should work, where, you know, only time it's going to be true is if they are exactly the same thing. Okay, the number 5 should not equal the string of 5. They're not the same thing. Okay, so generally always use the triple equal sign. And in the beginning, just focus on using the triple equal sign. And then, you know, you'll get deeper and learn, like, again, a lot of these older things like the double equal sign and the var keyword, things you may not necessarily use as much today. We're using like, you know, a function as a constructor. These are things that aren't done as much nowadays. Will be useful to learn later on because you may have to read old code in the, you know, if you're planning to work writing JavaScript code. But first, you want to wrap you want to kind of wrap your head around the concepts. So essentially here the concept is that when I use Boolean operators, I'm going to get back a Boolean, which means I'm going to get back true or false. It's a Boolean expression because, again, an expression always gives you something back. A math expression will always give you back a number. A string expression will always give you back a string. And a Boolean expression should always give you back a Boolean. Okay? Now, so let's just kind of see like the result of all of those. Okay, so let's just run through those. Like 5 greater than 6. Well, 5 is not greater than 6, so that's false. Okay, is 5 less than 6? That's true. 5 is less than 6. Is 5 greater than or equal to 6? That's false. Is 5 less than or equal to 6? That's true. Is 5 the same thing as 5? Yeah, that's true. Okay, so those are your sort of your main operators. Now you can actually even like go further and you can ask multiple questions. Okay, so I can say, hey, is 5 equal to 5 and is 6 equal to 6? So now both things have to be true. So what's going to happen here is that first it's going to evaluate these individually. So say, is 5 greater than 5? Or is 5 equal to 5? True. Okay, so now we have true here. Then it's going to evaluate this one and say, okay, 6 equal to 6. That's true. And then this means, hey, it's true on both sides. Yep, this was true. This was true. So then the whole thing is true. And that's going to give me back true. Okay, so if I run this again, I should have a third true there in that last line. Let's go see right there. So we have 3 trues. I could also change this to or. Okay, that's 2 pipes. And that means only one of them has to be true. So long as there's a true on one side, we're good. Okay, so you have, and you can do as many ors and ands as you want. So you can be like, you know, if this is true and 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 this is true. Sometimes there may be better ways of doing that. Like if you're starting to write a long list of Booleans, there might be better tricks as you get more acquainted with JavaScript to not have to write that much out. Okay, always the goal is to write less code and find ways. Not so little code that the code's unreadable though. Okay, so generally priority is readability. You want your code to, you want to use, like, notice how I like my variable names. I could have just written like X, but I wrote my Boolean so that it's clear what the variable has. So readability is always like the first priority because you want other people to be able to read your code. Then, you know, the next thing is going to be efficiency. You want to write as little code as possible because the less code you write, the less bugs, the less things you have to change in the future. You want to, and then you don't want your code to be redundant. So generally, if some things you want to, what's called don't repeat yourself. So keep it simple. You don't want to repeat yourself, and you want your code to be readable. If you follow those sort of like 3 principles, then there's other principles like you ain't gonna need it. Don't try to build something you don't need yet. You follow these principles, like just focus on what you need now, build it as simple as possible, and think about not repeating your code. So like if there's something you wrote more than once, maybe there's a way where you can write it just once, and then again write your variable names and your function names in ways that people can understand what their intention is, what is their purpose. Okay, you're going to write better code that other people can read, and that's highly valued, because the last thing your team members want is to be really confused with what your code's doing, because you use really small variable names and it's just all like you squeeze everything into this one line, cool, but no one knows what it's doing. But with that, I'm going to end this video. I'll see you all in the next one, and have a good one. But yeah, we learned about expressions. I'll see you all in the next one.